friends, thank you for watching this video. I am Mohamad, and today we're going to be doing a live coding session. Today we're going to be building a custom API, and this API is going to be part of a big project. We're going to be building basically a health tracking tool, where basically we're going to be input some health records and we'll be able to track them on the long run. This is going to be the first project of a really long project. If you like this video, please like, share and subscribe. It will really help the channel. Now let's jump into it. The first thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be checking all of the requirements that we're going to be needing in order for us to get started. So let's go to our web browser. Let's go to Edge. And let's go, for example, to Google. And then from here we need Visual Studio Code. I already downloaded it, but you can just download it through this link, or you can Google it, similar to what I did. And we're going to be needing the .NET 5 SDK, similar to this. Perfect. We need this, so all you need to do is download it. I have already downloaded and installed. So once we have done that, the next step is we need to make sure that the .NET 5 SDK has been installed successfully, and to do that we need to type .NET --version, and we can see that I have the latest version, which is 5.0.401 by the time of this recording. If you have any other number, that should be fine. If you have any error, you need to re-download it. So since we have .NET installed, now let us create our application. So it's going to be .NET new, because we're creating web API, we need to use the web API keyword, and then we're gonna give it a name, and we're gonna call it, so basically, because it's gonna be to track health information, what we can call it is صحة, which means health in Arabic, and basically we can call it notebook .api, because it's an API. And let's create it. Perfect. Now let's open this, and let's open it in code, Visual Studio Code. Okay, great. Now that has been opened in our Visual Studio Code, let us open our terminal and let us just build it. So .NET build. Perfect, it build succeeded. So the first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be cleaning up a bit. So let us remove this weather forecast. We don't really need it now. Delete. Yes, I want to move to trash. Controllers, let's see, this one, I don't need this controller, so delete. Let us build this right now, see if it will actually build or not. Great. So now let's start by adding some of the main packages that we're gonna be needing. We're gonna start by installing our Entity Framework tool. I have already installed it, but let us go through it again. So we're gonna type .NET tool install -- global, because we wanted to make it available anywhere in our machine, and then basically .NET -ef. And as you can see, it says that I have already installed it, but for you it might take up to a few seconds to get installed. So once we have done that, the next step is basically we need to install some packages into our application, and that we're going to use .NET add keywords. So .NET add package. We're going to first Microsoft .entity framework core .SQLite, because currently we're going to be utilizing SQLite as our database. This should take a few seconds. Great. The next one is we're going to install an Entity Framework core tools. So .NET add package Microsoft .entity framework core .tools. I think I misspelled something. Let's see. Microsoft entity framework core.tools. .NET add package Microsoft.entity. Oh, framework is wrong. Okay, that should work now. Perfect. Now let's verify that they have been installed successfully by going to the CS project, and we can see both of them have been installed successfully. Great. So once we have done that, the next step for us is to just let us build this application, make sure everything built as it should be. So .NET build. Great, now the build has succeeded and we know that our application is building as it should be. So let's build our project together. So let's go back to Jira. Let's open our web browser. And let's create a new ticket. Because this application will allow users to create accounts and basically pull down their information, so on and so forth. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating first a user endpoint, and basically it's going to be a controller, and that controller is going to allow us just to post and get user information. And this is going to be like a step-by-step project where we're just going to be adding stuff as we go. So let us start with this, and then we're going to go into the authentication and the authorization and how we can create tokens and so on and so forth. But first, let us make it very simple by just creating an endpoint where user will be able to post their information and then we'll be able to retrieve it. So let's create a ticket for this so we are able to track it. So we're going to make it create user endpoint. And so first let us click on create, and then basically we're gonna make this as an epic, and then we're gonna make this user endpoint management, and then we can say within this endpoint we will have the following functionalities. This is a very simplistic views, but just give us a quick overview of what do we want to accomplish. And then we can say that the functionalities we're gonna be like post or pull user information, store user information. We need to create the table in the database which is going to be responsible for that. So create users table, and basically what else we can do, and let's say update user information, and we can also, let's keep this as general as much as we can here. So because here we're going to be requiring some database work, so let's click on this create first, and let's click on create again, and we're going to create another epic. Basically we're going to call it database epic or database management. So within this epics we're going to be first, this epic is going to be responsible on handling all database structure management and changes. So we're gonna first create our, let's say it's gonna be our EF, our application DB context, which is gonna be a separate class library. we're gonna create the unit of work for the DB context. We're gonna be creating all of the repository, and we're gonna be wiring the app DB context to the startup class. Okay, now let's start first by creating a tickets for the database. So create, so this is going to be a task, and let's see here within this task we're going to be create a class, a DB context class library. So I'm going to say create a DB context class library, which will be responsible on all DB related tasks. Okay, and so the name of the class library is gonna be, we can call it, let's see, we can call it صحة notebook dot, so we can call it صحة notebook dot data service. That should be fine. And then we need to install packages, all EF core and SQLite packages. I think that should be fine. And let's make this the basic one, and then we need to add reference to the API. Add DB, so basically data service to the API as a reference. Okay, great. Let us create it. Let's see if we open it. Perfect. I think that should be fine. Now let's go back to our source code, and then from here let's take a step back, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a new class library. So in order for us to do that, it's going to be .NET new Classlib, and we're going to give it the name, as we said, صحة notebook dot data service, and let's create this. Perfect. Now let's see if we do code. API, and now here we can see we have both of the projects together. Great. So the first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be deleting this class. We don't need it. Let's open the terminal, and now we're going to be, let's navigate to the صحة notebook data service, and we're going to start by installing some packages here. Okay, so the first package that we're going to be installing is going to be the Entity Framework Core SQLite. So basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be removing those dependencies from the main API and adding them here. I think it's going to be a better idea. So .NET add package Microsoft Microsoft dot entity framework core dot SQLite. Let's install this. Okay, great. Now let's install the other one, which is gonna be tools. And now after that, what we're gonna do is design. Okay, great. Now let's go back to the Saha Notebook API, and then let's remove these from here because we don't really need them here. Okay, let's save this. And let's go back here, and we need to see them here. Okay, perfect. Another library that we need to install, or package that we need to install, is gonna be the entity framework core for identity, because basically we're gonna be able to authenticate the user, and basically we're gonna be allowing them to create their own accounts. And for that, we're going to be utilizing the ASP.NET Core identity. And for our application to be able to know that it's going to be requiring identity, and our DB context will be able to identify that, we need to install this dependency. So inside our terminal, we're going to type .NET add package, and that's going to be Microsoft.ASP.NET Core identity entity framework core. Perfect. Now let's check it out here. Great, we can see it. Now inside our Saha Notebook data service, let's create a new folder, and this folder we're gonna call it data. Great. Inside this data, we're gonna get a new class, and we're gonna call it app DB context. Great. So inside this app DB context, in order for us to recognize that this class is our application DB context, we need to inherit from a DB context class, which is provided by Entity Framework Core. And since we're gonna be utilizing identity, it makes sense to actually utilize the identity DB context, because basically it will allow us to automatically create all of the required tables inside the database that require the identity, like ASP.NET Core users, roles, so on and so forth. And basically what we're going to be doing right now is, once we do that, let's save this, and basically we need to create the constructor. So we need to pass this to the constructor, and once we create that, we're going to be able to actually just build this application, make sure that it builds as it should. So inside the class, what we're going to be doing is we're going to create a constructor, and basically this constructor is going to take some application options. So DB context options, and we're going to pass the app DB context, and it's going to be options, and we're going to pass this option to the base class. Okay, great. Save this, and let us just type .NET build, and this is gonna cause us errors because right now our application here does not know anything about the application DB, our identity package that we have installed, which is this one. So what we can do is, for some reason IntelliSense does not pick it up, but we can add it manually until IntelliSense is able to pick it up. Put using Microsoft.ASP.NET Core .identity .entity framework core entity. Let's see if this will help. Nope. okay, one out, one down. So the other one is not able to understand DB context options. I think this one is gonna be using Microsoft.entity framework core. I think that should be fine. Let's see. Okay, great. So now that our application actually recognized the identity DB context and the app DB context, what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be creating our entities. So let's take a step back from here, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a new class library which is going to purely dedicated to the entities. So that way we can have separation between everything. We don't have a single library which contains everything, so we need to do separation of concerns. So we're gonna put .NET new Classlib. We're gonna give it a name of notebook dot entities. Great. Now let's check it here, and let's delete the class, we don't need it. Yes. So now inside our new entities class library, what we're going to be doing is we're going to create a new folder, and this folder is going to call dbset, because basically these entities that we're going to be creating inside this folder, they're going to belong to the database. And the reason we did that, let's say we want to create some DTOs later on, or we have, for example, NoSQL dbset that we want to set, so it makes sense to separate them from here. Some other solution is to actually create different class libraries for all of these, but right now, because our application is still small, let us do it like this. In case on the long run we decide that we need to make it a bit bigger and it has more stuff, it makes sense to separate it then. But for now, let's reduce a bit the complexity and have it all here. So inside this dbset folder, we're gonna be creating the entity class for users, which is basically gonna be mapped directly to the database. So user, and usually in order for us to avoid a lot of the parameters or a lot of the fields that's gonna sit inside the table, and what it makes sense to actually create a new class. We'll call it, for example, this is a base class, or yeah, we can call it base entity, and it's an abstract class, and basically it makes sense to always contain for it the ID. So prop public, and so we set public, sorry, it's gonna be a GUID, and it's gonna be an ID, and basically what we can do is gonna be GUID dot new GUID. So that way, whenever we want to initialize this, we can actually just call it methods. And for this to work, we need using the system. And another entity that's good to know is state. It's going to be int status. And basically, the status mean, let's put it always to equal 1, because it's always active, and then we can switch it off. So something that I like to do is whenever do like hard delete from the database, it's always soft delete, and this will allow us to do any let's say we delete some information and we need to restore it. So with the hard delete we are not able to, because it's completely gone from the database. But with the status, it means that we can actually flip the switch between is it visible or not. It's a bit more work, but it's if we're having a lot of sensitive information, it makes sense to do it this way. So the next step is, let's add, for example, an added date. So it's going to be of date time, and we'll call it added date, and also it's going to initialize it to datetime dot UTC now, because basically we want the UTC time of when we added it. And let's add another one, which is also going to be date time, and we can say update date, sorry, date, not data. And it's gonna be basically whenever we update, we can set this field. I think this should be fine for now. Maybe later on we can add the update, the user who added those and the user who did the update, but for now this should be fine. Now once we have done that, let's go back to our user class and let's inherit from the base entity. Sorry for that. And now let's add the fields that we want to add. So right now all of the fields that we have defined the base entity will automatically be available for us in the user one. So now let's add some of the fields. Let's see, did we add them to the, I don't think we added them to the Jira ticket, but let us a new ticket and we can map them. So this one we're gonna be add user entity, and basically the user entity is gonna contain first name, last name, email, phone, let's say date of birth, what other information do we want to record? Say first name, last name, email, phone, date of birth. We can actually record country, because the vaccination could differ, or like the health information could differ from country to country. And let us also say first name, last name, email, phone, date of birth, country, and I think that should be fine. That should be fine. So create, and let's actually move this here and this here because they are in progress. Now let's go back to our code. So as we said here, let's open this. First name, last name. So there's gonna be string. So property string first name, and then property string last name, and then it's gonna be again property, I think, with string for email. Yep. And then we have prop string phone, and then we have date of birth and country prop, so date time, and we can put date of birth, and I think the last one was country, so let's make it a string. Okay, so now that we have created this user entity, I think the next step for us is to first add a reference from entities to data service that they will be able to communicate. And then once we do that, we can update the application DB context with this entity, and then maybe we can create the migration from inside the Saha notebook. And then once we created that migration, what we can do is we can actually create a controller and we can maybe save some information there. Okay, so let us first add the reference. Okay, to add reference from the Saha notebook entities to data service, we need to actually utilize the .NET add phrase keyword, sorry, inside our terminal. So it's going to be .NET add Saha notebook.data service. We need to specify the CS proj. We're going to put reference to Saha notebook.entities, again .cs proj, and this should be fine. Now let's go here to Saha notebook data service and let's open the CS proj, and we can see that this has been added. Okay, great. So once we have done that, the next step for us is actually to update the application DB context, and we update it by adding a reference to the users table, to the users entity, in order for us to create that table. So how do we do that? It's going to be very easy. It's going to be first public virtual, and then we're going to add the DB set, and then we're going to pass it the user class, and then What are we gonna be calling this DB set? We're gonna calling it users, and we're gonna do the getter and the setter. I think that should be fine. And let's do this, save this. I think this is gonna create an issue here, so let's fix this. It's gonna be using صح notebook .entities .db set. Now let's try to build that. So cd to data service, that's .NET build. See if it's gonna build successfully. It didn't. It gave us an error. Let's see what this error is. So block body expression both can be provided. Base entities. So let's go to the base entities. So what's wrong here? Okay, so that's one down, and then it says that inside the user date time is not known, so we need to add using system. Okay, let's see what else do we have. And it says base entity expression both online 9, I think. Okay, great. So the main issue was try to initialize it as a lambda function, and that's not the case. It needs to be equal. Okay, so once we have that done, the next step is for us to actually add reference to the data service to our main API. So the way we do that is similar to what we did before. .NET add API, API, we can put reference and add back to the data service and the data service. Great. Now let us go here and inside our API, let's check the CS proj, and we can see that's here. Now let's build this. So we need to go to the API and .NET build. Okay, great. Now the application is building as it should be, and it's connected to the other two class libraries through the application DB, so through the data service class library. Perfect. So the next step for us is we need to actually do a migration. So how do we gonna do a migration, and how are we gonna create this database? First, we need to actually configure our API in order for it to recognize that there's going to be an application DB context. And once we do that, we need to create a migration script. Okay, the first thing we're going to be doing inside our notebook.api, we're going to go to the app settings and we're going to add a new connection string. So we're going to have connection string, and basically we're going to give the default connection. And we're going to specify where is our database going to live, and because we're going to be using SQLite, we're going to make it inside the same folder that we currently have, and we're going to call this going to be app.db. So it's going to be data source equal app.db. So once we do that, next we need to go to the startup class, and inside the startup class, inside our configure services, we need to inject the service that we need in order for us to communicate with the database. And for us to do that, what we're going to be doing is we're going to add the following. It's going to be services dot add db context, and we're going to pass the app db context that we created earlier, and then we're going to pass the options. And basically these options, we're going to tell it that we're going to be utilizing SQLite. And once we do that, we need to pass the connection string. So we're going to use configuration. and then we're gonna put .get connection string, and then we're gonna pass the default connection that we have. Let's do this here. SQL, it has to be used SQLite, yes. Okay, great. And let's fix this reference here. Let us navigate to the API. .NET build. Perfect. Now let's see if we are able to generate a migration file. So in order for us to generate a migration file, which is going to be basically create the database, create all of the entities for our identity provider as well as the users table, we need to do it from the data service class library. So let's go to the data service class library, and let us do this .NET EF, because we have installed the entity framework tool before. We say migrations, add, and basically we're gonna call it initial migration, and we're gonna pass it the startup project because it needs a startup project in order for it to run, and because the data service class library is not gonna work by itself, so we need to pass it to the main application. And we're gonna say here it's gonna be notebook.api. Okay, so we need to add this Nuget package to our API. That's fine. So how do we do that? Simply, it's simple, similar to what we have used before to add packages. So what we can do, let's add a new terminal. And let's go to the API, so notebook.api, and then we're gonna .NET add, and we're gonna pass this. Sorry, add package. I forgot the word package. Okay. Perfect. Now let's go to the other terminal and let's run this again. We can say it's working. Perfect. We can see that we have migration created. Now let's see where do we see that migration file created. Because we have it's part of the data service, it needs to be created part of the data service class library. And if we look here, we can see that there's a new folder that has been automatically created for us, which is called migration. And if we open this, we can see that we have something called the app Db Context model snapshot, as well the initial migration stuff. So let's first look at the app Db Context snapshot. Basically, it's a representation of what do we have currently inside the database, and basically it's a list of all of the tables. And you can think to yourself, oh, but we didn't create something called an identity role, or we did not create something called identity user, so on and so forth, or identity user login. We did not create any of this. How are these tables created? But if we look all the way down, we can see that our user table has been added. We can see the ID, the added date, the country, date of birth, so on and so forth. So we can think to ourselves, but how was that, how other tables are created? It's created because inside our application DB context, we have referred the identity DB context. And basically the identity DB context here, it generates all of the identity tables that we need in order for us to add the authentication service to our database. And because here currently the identity DB context have all of those tables, it automatically generated them. And if we look at the initial migration, we can see all of these tables: ASP.NET roles, users, claims. All of these are automatically generated except the users one. So now with all of this, we don't really see still the database. How can we open the database, or how can we actually generate the database? It's very easy. We need to go .NET EF database update, and similar to what we did before, we need to specify the startup class, and we need to make it it has to be 2. and let's give it a few seconds, and let's keep a close eye here. Oh, startup class. Oh, it should be startup project. Apologies. Let's keep an eye here, and we should see here a SQLite database pop up. And as we can see here, we have the app.db database has been created for us. Okay, great. Once we have done that, the next step for us is let us just open this open this database utilizing the DB Beaver. So let's do this. Yes, open. And now let's add a new connection. It's gonna be SQLite. Next, let's browse. It's gonna be on the desktop. YouTube, episode 1, API, and open. Let's test the connection. Perfect. Finish. And now if we open this, we can see that all of our tables has been created for us. So the claims, the role, as well as the users table, and if we view the data, it should be empty, but there's nothing here. If we look at the properties, we can see all of the properties that we have identified here has automatically been created. Perfect. So once we have done that, let's close this one. Now what we're gonna be doing is basically we need to add some need to add the controller, and then we need to add some action to those controllers. Now let's go to our controllers folder, and inside our controllers folder, let's create a new class. And for now, we're gonna call this users controller. And basically, we're gonna convert this class into a controller class. So first thing we need to do is we need to inherit from the base controller. And I think this one, let's think the reference. Is it? I think it's controller base. Let's see. Yes, controller base. So once we have done that, now let's add other information for this controller so it will actually be a callable controller. So first thing we need to do is we need to add the route for it. So route, and we're gonna make it API / and we're gonna just give it the controller. Okay, and after that, what we're gonna be doing is we're gonna do API controller, so we know it's an API. And then once we did that, let's just create any sample action and make sure that this is actually working. So what we can do is we can just create another route, and we're just gonna call it test run, just to make sure it's running. And we're gonna make it HTTP GET. And then what we can do is we can do public. Let's make it iAction result. And we're gonna call it test run. And all it's gonna be doing is it's gonna return an OK with a success. I think that should be fine. Now let's navigate back to our application, to our API actually, and let's do a .NET build. If I can type. Okay, perfect. Now .NET run. Perfect. Now I recommend having Postman installed or Insomnia. I think Insomnia is really good. So let's open Insomnia. So dashboard, create, let's say request collection, and we're gonna call this one Saha notebook. Create, and let's create first the new request, and we're gonna call this one test run. And it's a GET, so let's create it. It's gonna require the URL, so it's gonna be based on port 5001. Let's copy this, Let's paste this here, and it's gonna be, as we said, /API /users test run, and let's send this, and we can see we got a response success, which means that our API is working as it should be. Great. So let's stop this now, and before we do move any further, let us update our Jira tickets. So let's go back to our web browser, and since this one is completed now, let's move this to done and create DB Context library. And okay, we did this, let's make this as done. Okay, so let's add more. So we're gonna do it right now. So we say like let's not use this one, let's use this one. So we can say create a controller, create a users controller. So right now what we're gonna be doing is create 2 endpoints. It's gonna be a get and a post endpoint, and basically these get and post endpoints, one of them is gonna be responsible for get 3 endpoints actually. So we're gonna put get user information based on ID, add a new user, and get all users. So this is the next step. So get all users, we're gonna say it does not take any params. It will take a DTO of user, and lastly here is gonna take an ID of type good. Okay, and this one let's make them a bit more nicer. So let's separate them. And what we can do is create 3 endpoints, create 3 users information based on this. Let's make this like this, so this, okay. And we can also, it's gonna return a user DTO after it has successfully created, successfully got the user info, and I'm gonna say return status is 200. So here it's gonna take the same thing, but the difference is it's gonna return a status of the one because it has just created it. And here it's gonna create a list, return a list of users. DTO, okay, perfect. So let's create these. Okay, great. Let me assign it to myself, although there's no one else, but it's good to see that it's assigned to me. Let's do this for this as well. And this one. Perfect. Okay, let's start by creating those controllers. Okay, now so let's navigate back to our code. And the first thing we're going to be doing is let's remove this. We don't need this anymore. And let's start with the 3 actions that we want. Get, post, and get all. So let's start by the get action, but first let's start by actually initializing the application DB contact inside our controller. So let's say private application app Db Context. We're gonna call it context, and then we're gonna utilize the constructor to initialize it. So I'll put app Db Context, and then here it's gonna be as simple as context equal context. So we're doing instructor initialization through dependency injection. If you don't know what dependency injection is, I have another video which I'm going to be linking up on the upper right hand side, where you can actually see what is dependency injection, how we can utilize it. Now let's create the get action. First it's going to be HTTP get, and then what we can do is public action result. We're going to call it get users. That should be fine. And basically it's going to var users equal let's say await. Let's use without the await now, so we can put underscore context dot users dot where x dot status equal 1, and we can make this to list actually. Dot to list. Again, this is only going to be a sample for now. We should not indirectly embed the application DB context through this. We need to create the better ways to create unit of work and then embed the unit of work here. This is going to be done in a future video, but for now, just so we can demonstrate the functionality of this, we're utilizing this method of injecting it in the constructor. So now let's return this. So return okay and users. That should be fine. So basically okay here means that we're gonna be returning a 200 HTTP response. So let's run this. So .NET run. Let's go back to Insomnia, and instead of test run, what we're gonna just do a get, and we should see basically a 200, and we see an empty array because basically we don't have anything which is coming back, which is what we expected. Now let's do the post. So let's stop this, and first we need to make it HTTP post, and then we're gonna public action result, and we're gonna make it say add user, and it's gonna take a user DTO. We're gonna create this class now. I'll call it user. And then once we do that, we need to save it. So again, tell you what, let's keep this as a user, and then we'll fill the information as it comes. So let's fix this. And then from now, so basically the reason I'm conflicted about this is a demo right now, but we should not send the same entity that's going to be saved in the database through our call. It should not be the case. We need to create something called a DTO, data transfer object, and this DTO is going to be responsible for mapping whatever we send into the actual entity. But for now, because it's a demo one, we're just going to use the user. So once we do this, what we can do is very simply, we're going to put underscore context dot users dot add and user, and we're just gonna save this context dot users dot save changes, and then we're just gonna return let's say return okay. Although we should return here at 201, we should return a 201, but for now we're just returning this. So let's see how we're gonna make this happen. So .NET run, great. Now let's go back to Postman, to Insomnia, and tell you what, let's change this to what it was before, and let's copy this. Let's create a new request, which is basically get users, get all users. It's better to organize it from now before we have a lot and we're not able to. And we just paste this here. Now let's send this. It should be 200 empty. Great. Now let's add a new request, and we're gonna say create user, and this is gonna be a post, and the body is gonna be JSON, and create. Now we need to create the body for it, but first let us pass the URL, and then let's see what is the requirement. So it's gonna be first name, last name, email, phone, date of birth, and country. Okay, so first name, it's gonna be Mohamad. Last name, it's gonna be Lawand. And we said it's gonna have email. It's gonna be mohamad@email.com. Phone, it's gonna be 1 2 3 4 5 6. Country, we're gonna be making it Lebanon. And finally date of birth, it's gonna be 04/08/1987. Okay, 1987. So let's get here and let's add some small changes before we do that. So we're gonna say user.status equal 1 for now. User.id is gonna automatically be added. The dates automatically be added. I think that's all we need to do. Let's stop this. Let's run this again. Okay, now let's go back to our insomnia. Let's send, and we got an error because there is a validation issue. JSON could not be converted to system.date. Yes, I had a feeling. So what we can do is we can put, this is why we needed a DTO. So just for now, so for simplicity's sake, instead of having this here, let us create inside the entities folder a new folder, and we'll call this DTOs, and we create a new folder inside of this, and we'll call this incoming, and we'll create another folder just so we can organize it from now. New folder, we'll say outgoing, and inside the incoming we create a new class, and we're gonna call it user DTO, just something like that. And we're gonna take the same information that we have inside user, copy this. Okay, where are we gonna put these? Inside user DTO, and basically I'm gonna make this as a string for now, just for now. And then once we do that, the next step is let us change this to user DTO. Let us fix those references. And what we can do is we can create var. We can call this underscore user equal a new user, and underscore user dot, for example, last name equal user dot last name, underscore user dot first name equal user dot first name, underscore user dot email equal user dot email, user dot date of birth equal user dot date of birth. No, this is we need to convert it to date time, so we put convert dot to date time, and we'll pass this inside. Let's fix this reference. Let's make this here, and then let's see what else did we miss. Date of birth, email we have added, first name, last name, phone equal user.phone, and I think this is it, and then we need to add the underscore users here. Okay, let's stop this and let's run this again. Okay, perfect. Now let's go back to Insomnia and let's send this request again, and we can see we have returned a nobody and we have a 200. Now let's check get all users, send, and we can see here that we got the information. Oh, we forgot to add the country. We can see that we have all of the information came back to us: first name, last name, email, phone address. Perfect, which means that our API is working. But let us fix the country stuff. So underscore user dot country equal user dot country, and let's run it again, and let's create a new user. We'll call this Donald, and let's put this duck, and we'll put Donald.email, and Donald is born in Disney. Okay, let's send this. Got a 200, and now all send, and we can see we have Mohamad and Donald coming back. Perfect, great. So the last one, so this is gonna be the post, and this is get all. So now let's put the get based on ID. So now let us add a root to this. HTTP get, sorry, it's gonna be root. We're gonna call it get user. And let's stop this, let's run this again, and let's go to Insomnia. And let's click on get, new request. It's gonna be get user per ID. Yes, create. Let's copy the same one, copy, and it's gonna be get user, and under query we're gonna give it the ID, and let's take one of these IDs, copy this one, paste it here, and now let's send this request, and we can see here that our object has been returned, but based on the ID that we have sent. So let's choose a different ID of Donald, for example, and let's copy this, let's go here, update this ID and send it. Perfect. So now this is the full functionality that we wanted to implement today regarding the users controller. We basically have the get all, post, and get per ID. As well, we have created the structure of our project that we wanted, which was basically an API project, a data service project, as well as an entity, and we map them all together. So thank you very much for watching. In our next video, we're going to be actually having more optimization on this. So we're going to strip out some of the controller and create a base controller. We're going to create a proper DTO. We're going to add some mappings. So instead of directly utilizing the user DTO from here, we're going to create some mappings for this. And then also what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding some authentication and basically creating the full flow of creating a user from and then logging in with that user. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good day.